Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia review. And today we'll be talking about the latest episode to drop, Tomura Shigaraki Origin, which picks up almost as a second part to the previous episode with the final confrontation of Shigaraki and Redestro, as well as delving even further into his backstory, showing how he was found by All For One after he killed his family and was groomed to become a villain. It also deals with the aftermath of the battle between the League of Villains and the Meta Liberation Army, setting up the events we saw play out in the Endeavor Agency arc, as well as preparing for the next big arc we'll see unfold in Season 6. And before we get properly started on the review though, I would like to say that I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points and details. But for the purpose of these reviews, I really only like to talk about what the anime has presented up to now and not go back and forth between the manga and the anime. It just helps keep the review streamlined and allows anime only fans to watch along and join in too. And with all that being said, let's get started on the review. The episode opens with a look at the immediate aftermath of the death of Shigaraki's family, with him wandering through the streets covered in blood, being ignored by passers-by who assume a hero will help him, or is just actively abandoned by people who find him creepy looking, until he eventually finds his way to All For One. And this is just sad. He was failed by society on a fundamental level. His dad abused him simply because he wanted to be a hero and help people, and his grandparents and his mum were too cowardly to help him until it was too late. And then he, at age 4 I think is when you manifest a quirk, is left wandering the street with nobody to help him and no hero bothering to come and check on him because there's supposedly more important things to do. It really is no wonder that he adopts a villainous persona when he's been essentially abandoned by society through no fault of his own. And the only person willing to actually help him was also a villain. Yes, it doesn't change that he's a total monster, but it definitely softens him up and makes him a more sympathetic character than he was before. And this leads to even more despicable All For One grooming scenes. And these are just the worst, but in a good way. It's so creepy to see how he basically dissects this little kid's mind and completely shifts his way of thinking, shaping him into a weapon that he can use one day. And it's also crazy how big brain All For One is here, preparing Shigaraki as a future weapon because he knows that One For All's gotten too powerful because of All Might, and thus one day he'll likely need a new vessel. All For One goes on to explain that Shigaraki's itch is just his innate desire to destroy that can't be contained by his body and mind. And I mean, this is such a cruel lie. The itch is obviously just a nervous habit he acquired from getting abused, and now it shows up when he's traumatized. And we see this when those thugs beat him up in the street and then he itches like mad in his room. But then by lying and saying that giving into the urges will fix the itch, it allows him to convince this child that killing people's okay, because ultimately it's in his best interests. It connects the brutality of his quirk with his abuse and incites him to indulge in using it. It's really smart manipulation, but very creepy. God, this scene is dark. And then of course, since he's just a frightened little kid, he gives in to the urges to kill because the only person left in his life tells him it's going to help him. Yikes. And then of course, he puts on the hands and kills the thugs, starting his path of villainy whilst All For One and the Doctor watch from a rooftop. And this is just such a good origin story. I've had some problems with how this arc has played out at times, but the way that Shigaraki's character has been handled is not one of those complaints. In just a handful of episodes, they've really transformed his character from broody man-child to deranged serial killer with a truly tragic past. It's a masterclass in character development. And then it's also explained that the reason he's unstable and emotional is because he's locked away his memories, which sort of explains that whole man-child thing. And that for the same reason, he couldn't control his quirk. But now he's got his memories back, he can. And this scene just really ties his character arc over the past 5 seasons together really well. And after this is where we learn why his name was changed to Tomura Shigaraki. Because Tomura means somebody who will bring mourning, and Shigaraki is All For One's family name. So surely Tomura is also his given name, right? Because he's clearly grooming this kid to steal his body one day. Surely. I think he's going to be his successor in name only. And instead of just passing on his powers, he's going to steal his body at some point in the future. I just don't see this guy who thrives on control deciding after 100 years or so just to give up and stop fighting. And I think it's also just really a nail in the coffin to coax Shigaraki into following him and believing in him, viewing All For One as this father figure because he gave him his name and a place to belong. And now in his mind, there's no reason to turn away from him. It just makes it all the more manipulative and understandable as to how Shigaraki came to be. And then we finally return to the battle between Redestro and Shigaraki, where Shigaraki reflects on how he only wants to destroy. He doesn't care about his future, or anybody's future. He just wants to destroy, like he destroyed his family, because it makes him feel light and happy. And that's pretty deranged. Anyway, Redestro goes full 100% and gets clapped. Good. And by the way, Shigaraki has a broken hand and a broken foot while he does this. Beast. And then, in an attempt to take him down, Redestro uses some super support Iron Man suit to try and beat him, using it to allow 150% output, even though his stress is actually receding. And I'm guessing that's because he realizes that Shigaraki is the true messiah here. And side note, the comment Shigaraki made about Redestro's power-up being Plus Ultra was actually quite funny. I do like how he mocks him all the time. And all the whilst this is going on, Gigantomachia makes his way to the battlefield to try and kill Shigaraki again. But you'd think he'd be there by now, he runs pretty fast. Oh, and all the MLA and the LOV are following behind to see what's happening. And then after all that, after that huge build-up, the Iron Man suit gets absolutely destroyed. Get wrecked, son. And Shigaraki follows this up by unleashing a brutal area attack which levels the city, leaving Gigantomachia standing there gaping at him in shock. And it's crazy how strong he's gotten in such a short span of time. I like it, but I think it would have been nice to have some of his power increase happen over the course of the seasons, as opposed to all at once. It just feels kind of rushed so that he can catch up to Deku. And then, speaking of Deku, as if we needed any more Shigaraki-Deku parallels, he comes out of the rubble with broken arms and legs, and waddles over to Redestro, who's had to cut off his legs to survive getting dusted. And as much as I dislike Redestro, you have to respect that. No hesitation, just cuts off his legs with a piece of metal scrap. And then he taunts Redestro, basically telling him he brought this on himself. And then Trumpet and the boys turn up, and Shigaraki's able to negate his quirk just by glaring at them. Just with a flash of the old crazy eyes. Jesus. And then in a big old 180, Redestro tells Trumpet and the army to stand down and declares that it's Shigaraki who's destined to help liberate the use of meta abilities, before bowing down to Shigaraki himself, who ends up sparing him because of how rich he is. And it's nice to know that Shigaraki's not stupid. I mean, this dude's clearly a fanatic, and now he obviously views Shigaraki as a pseudo-god. Plus, his contacts and resources would be able to give Shigaraki greater reach on his path of destruction. So it was actually quite smart to keep him alive, as it also buys him the loyalty of the other top members of the army. And then on top of this, Gigantomachia witnessed all this and was reminded of All For One, so now he'll also follow loyally. And I mean, it really is just all working out quite well for Shigaraki right now. But that flash where Gigantomachia sees All For One as Shigaraki for a second makes me quite sure the body steal theory is going to come into effect in the future for sure. I mean, there's just no chance it doesn't happen after all these parallels, right? And after seeing the full extent of his backstory. There's just no way. We then flash forward a week to see that the entire attack was covered up by Redestro and the Liberation Army, being framed as a villain attack with the civilians of the city fighting back as no heroes were present. But I mean, this one's a bit unrealistic, surely. How can anybody be buying this? It just feels all very convenient. But then again, since Hawks does go undercover almost straight away after this and joins up, I guess you could argue the Commission also thought this was a load of BS, but didn't want to alert the villains that were onto them. And we also got to see a brief scene of the LOV bonding together with Spinner and Compress eating sushi, Darby ragging on Compress for being useless and questioning why Twice is still insane, whilst Twice mourns the Toga clone he made for the blood transfusion. And I liked this scene. It was fun to see the little dynamics playing out in the group, and it was nice to see Darby actually involved as a member, as opposed to him being the outsider. We then move on to the Liberation Army Conference, where the LOV and MLA combined to form the Paranormal Liberation Front, under the leadership of Shigaraki, with all the relevant named characters as his lieutenants. And I love that Redestro, this guy that was so arrogant and full of himself, has been reduced to Shigaraki's mouthpiece, and is obsessed with him. It's a glorious fall from grace, and well deserved. The dude was a terrible leader. And I also love that Trumpet just finds him cringe now. It's just crazy how this guy who was built up as this huge threat to Shigaraki was just so utterly dismantled and shamed, much like Overhaul was. Justice. We then finish off the episode with the revelation that Shigaraki's ready to receive his additional powers from the Doctor, like we saw a while ago, while the preview sets up the hero's response to Shigaraki's increase in power and stature. And that brings us to the end of the review, and this episode was good. I feel like the whole Redestro fight was a bit underwhelming, but perhaps that was the point. It ultimately didn't matter, and Redestro didn't matter. He was just the catalyst for Shigaraki's rise to power, and a way for him to unlock his hidden potential. I also really like the new path that Shigaraki's going down as a character, and that they're getting away from the broody young adult he was before. Him and Deku having their first clash since they both powered up immensely is going to be glorious. That being said though, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.